Good afternoon, everybody. So this is a very light-hearted quiz. Please don't take it too seriously. There is a prize for the person who lasts the longest, which is a very well-regarded book called Skywatching by David Levy. You may have seen a brief reference to Comet Shoemaker Levy 9 on the screen earlier. That is the same David Levy. What we're going to do, it's a fairly straightforward format here. I'm going to invite everybody in a moment to stand up. We'll put the lights up so that we can see what's going on. I'm going to ask a series of questions to which the answer is either higher or lower. If you think the answer is higher, you put your hands on your head to indicate your answer. Okay? If you think the answer is lower, you put your hands on your bum. All right? It's that simple. Okay? That's all you have to do. Either that or that, depending on what you think the answer is. Okay? I will then tell you the answer to the question. If your hands are in the right place, you stay standing. If your hands are in the wrong place, you have to sit down. I'm afraid you're out of the game. And the last person standing wins the book. It's that straightforward. Okay? All ready? Everybody up. So the first question, is the mass of the Earth higher or lower than the mass of the Moon? Yeah. Right. Right. If anybody has... put your hands on your head, would you? Right. That was the easy one to get everybody started, right? If you are in a tiny minority who has their hands on their bottom, then I'm afraid you're out. But the mass of the Earth is massively greater than the mass of the Moon. So if you had your hands on your head, you're still in. Actually, the mass of the Moon is only about 1.2% or something of the mass of the Earth because the Earth's got a massive iron core. It's a surprisingly large ratio. Right. Is the amount of energy emitted by a star like the Sun higher or lower than the amount of energy emitted by a planet like Saturn? If you think the answer's higher, put your hands on your head. If you have the urge to vote lower, put your hands on your bottom. Again, if you have your hands on your bum, they're in the wrong place and you have to sit down. But everybody happy? Good. It's going to get harder, trust me. I just thought I'd warm you up, okay? And at some point, the answer won't be higher. Is the distance of Mars from the Sun higher or lower than the distance of Venus from the Sun? My very elderly mother. Right. Anybody got their hands on their bottom, you have to sit down. But if your hands are on your heads, you're still in. Because it is indeed Mars. Now this is a bit harder. The diameter of the Sun is much greater than the diameter of the Earth. But is the number of times the Sun is larger than the Earth higher or lower than 100? I've got the president of the Royal Astronomical Society thinking carefully about this one. No pressure, John. If your hands are on your heads, you're still in. The right answer is 109 times. Oh, now this is getting tricky. Is the top of Mount Olympus, the huge volcano on Mars, relative to the mean surface level on Mars, higher or lower than the top of Mount Everest relative to sea level on Earth? Does anybody have their hands on their bottom? I'm afraid you're sitting down. So those of you who have your hands on your head are right. Despite the fact that Mars is a smaller planet, because it has a lower gravity, volcanoes can grow to extraordinary sizes, and there isn't much erosion on Mars. So although Mount Olympus is very old, it hasn't been worn down by, rain and stuff because there isn't any on Mars. So it's about 24 kilometres high from memory, and Mount Everest is nowhere near that high. Right. Is the number of stars within 15 light years of the Earth higher or lower than 100? No, that's stars. No, sorry, good point of clarification. That's all stars, whether we can see them or not from the Earth with the naked eye. Everybody decided? Right. If your hands are on your head, I'm afraid you have to sit down. The right answer is 55. It's lower. Is the radius of Jupiter higher or lower than the radius of Saturn, not including Saturn's rings? There's always one, isn't there? And it's nearly always Don. Right. If you have your hands on your head, they are in the right place because Jupiter is bigger than Saturn. Okay? If you had your hands on your bum, you have to sit down. Right. Is the age of the solar system higher or lower than 5 billion years? Everybody decided? Right. Those people that I can see with their hands on their heads, I'm sorry, but you've got to sit down. The answer is lower. It's 4.5, or if it helps to remember it, 4,567 is the current 4,567,000,000,000 years is the current best estimate of the age of the solar system. Right. Let's go to the moon. Is the number of dark areas, called mare, on the near side of the moon higher or lower than the number of dark areas on the far side? Have you made up your mind yet? God. Right. You've just put your hands on your bottom. Oh dear. If you have your hands on your head, they're in the right place. Stay standing. There are virtually no mare on the far side of the moon. There's one area that I think has the technical definition, but there's not a lot. If you were paying attention earlier, you'll know the answer to this question. I didn't quite coordinate well enough with Matthew. Is the time it takes the Earth to rotate once on its axis higher or lower than 24 hours? Most people have their hands on their bum. I can see 2 people with their hands on their heads who I'm afraid are out because it's 23 hours, 56 minutes and 4 seconds, as Matthew mentioned earlier. Oh, now this is a good one. Is the length of a day on Mercury higher or lower than the length of a year on Mercury? You've got to put your hands somewhere, Don. Right. Right, I can see a few brave souls with their hands on their heads. Who thinks a day's longer than it? Well, you're right. So if your hands are on your bum, you have to sit down for that one. So Mercury rotates very, very slowly. It takes 88 days to go round the sun. That's the length of its year. It takes 176 days between one sunrise and the next. So the day on Mercury is longer than the year. Right, here's a fun one, but you have to do a little bit of mental arithmetic on this one. So the moon is slowly receding from the Earth at about 4 centimetres a year. Neil Armstrong was about 180 centimetres tall before his sad passing recently. Since he walked on the moon, is the distance it has receded higher or lower than his own height? Oh, thank you. Just to make sure I didn't make a mistake. I think I can remember most of them. Right, higher or lower? Right, so in the time since, let's see, how many have we got left? There's still some mathematics going on over here. Come on, Katie, you've got to commit. Right. If you have your hands on your head, remain standing. Because the moon has receded at this rate at least 188 centimetres since 1969. It's actually slightly longer than that. It's probably about 190 centimetres, I think. Right. Is the number of moons orbiting Jupiter higher or lower than 60? For the purposes of this question, a moon is defined as something with a diameter of at least 1 kilometre. Okay? There are almost certainly, as Don has kindly pointed out, many, many thousands or millions of really tiny things going around Jupiter, but they don't count as moons. They're part of the ring system. How many things bigger than a kilometre? So, is it higher or lower? How many people have we got left in? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. Right. I'm afraid for the 2 people who have their hands on their bum, you're going to have to sit down. The answer's 63. We have 3 left. Is the distance to Alpha Centauri higher or lower than the distance to Polaris, the pole star? Everybody's gone for lower, and you're all right. At the end of its life, as a star can end its life as a neutron star or a white dwarf. Is the typical size of a neutron star higher or lower than a white dwarf? Everybody's gone for lower again, and you're right. Relative to Jupiter, is the orbit radius of Callisto on the left higher or lower than the orbit radius of Io on the right? We have 3 going for higher. Wouldn't it be embarrassing if you were all wrong? You're all right. Right, according to estimates made in 2006, is the mass of our companion galaxy, M31, the Great Spiral Galaxy in Andromeda, higher or lower than our own Milky Way? You've all gone for higher and you're all right. Is the temperature of Saturn's moon Titan higher or lower than minus 200 degrees C? Don't give it away yet. Right, I'm sorry, but you're out. So it is higher. It is about minus 176, I think. But anyway, it's the triple point of methane, just as the Earth is close to the triple point of water, where water can exist as an ice, as a solid, as a liquid water, or as a gas, water vapor. The same sort of conditions on Titan, but with methane as the element in question. When it touched down on the moon, was the fuel duration remaining on the Apollo 11 Eagle spacecraft higher or lower than 1 minute?
This is a trick question.
No. Are your hands in your final answer?
I haven't decided how tricky the question is.
I see where you're going with this. You're being too clever. But because you're a professional astronomer and this gentleman isn't, congratulations to John for winning the book. I know where you're going with this. They had to get back, yeah. Okay, for the descent module, I will refine the question for the really clever people amongst us next time I do this. Thank you very much indeed. Right, my next job is to introduce my good friend Chris again, despite our differences on, as seen before lunch. Oh, sorry, it was only about 20 seconds. It's not very well known exactly how much fuel they had because, as some of the technologists around the room might tell you, measuring the amount of fuel left on a spacecraft is actually quite tricky because you're in a rather different gravitational environment. But they reckon that Neil Armstrong had somewhere between 10 and 30 seconds worth of fuel left when he actually touched the surface. And there's that quote from one of the guys in Mission Control saying, thank you, for confirming you're on the surface. You've got a bunch of guys turning blue here. We're breathing again now, because they thought he was going to run out of fuel. Anyway, Chris is now going to talk to us about beyond Earth orbit.